The night they laughed at me was the same night a billionaire noticed I existed. The crystal flute slipped from my fingers before I could stop it. 1 second it was balanced perfectly on my silver tray, reflecting the golden light of the ballroom chandeliers. The next, it struck the marble floor and shattered into 100 glittering pieces. The sound seemed impossibly loud. Conversation stopped. Music faded beneath a wave of startled silence. Every face in the room turned toward me. My heart dropped straight into my stomach. I stood frozen beneath the glow of chandeliers worth more than everything I owned combined. Around me, women in designer gowns stared with open annoyance. Men in tailored tuxedos shook their heads. I could practically hear what they were thinking. Just another careless maid. Heat rushed into my cheeks. "I'm so sorry," I whispered, already kneeling to collect the broken glass. My black uniform suddenly felt tighter. Smaller. Like it announced exactly where I belonged in a room like this. Not among the guests. Not beneath the sparkling ceiling of the Ashford Estate ballroom. Not anywhere that mattered. "Maybe they should train the staff better," a woman said loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. A few people chuckled. Another guest lifted his champagne glass and smirked. "Maids should stay invisible." More laughter followed. It wasn't cruel enough to make headlines. It never is. It was the kind of casual humiliation wealthy people delivered without even realizing they were doing it. The kind that reminded you exactly where you stood. I lowered my eyes and kept gathering the shattered pieces. My fingers trembled. Not from anger. From necessity. My mother needed her medication. The rent was due in 10 days. Losing this job wasn't an option. So I smiled. Apologized again. And swallowed every ounce of pride. That's what survival looked like sometimes. The string quartet resumed playing. Conversation slowly returned. The guests moved on as if nothing had happened. To them, it hadn't. To me, it was just another reminder that people only noticed someone like me when I made a mistake. I carried the empty tray toward the service corridor, trying to disappear before anyone else could offer an opinion. The scent of expensive perfume lingered in the air. Laughter echoed behind me. My shoes clicked softly across polished marble floors that seemed to stretch forever. I pushed through the staff door and finally exhaled. The corridor beyond was quiet. Dimly lit. Safe. At least safer than the ballroom. I leaned against the wall for a moment and closed my eyes. "You okay?" another server asked. I nodded automatically. Fine. It was a lie. But poor people become experts at pretending they're fine. I adjusted my uniform and prepared to return to work. That's when I felt it. A gaze. Heavy. Focused. Different from the judgmental stares I'd endured all evening. I turned slowly toward the open ballroom doors. Across the crowded room, standing near the grand staircase beneath a cascade of crystal light, was a man I recognized immediately. Ethan Ashford. Owner of Ashford Technologies. Billionaire. One of the most powerful men in America. And at that exact moment, he was looking directly at me. Not past me. Not through me. At me. His expression revealed nothing. Calm. Controlled. Impossible to read. Then someone approached him and broke the moment. He looked away. The spell vanished. I told myself it meant nothing. I picked up my tray and returned to work. But I didn't know that before the night was over, Ethan Ashford would remember my name. The hospital envelope felt heavier than paper should. I stared at it for almost a full minute before opening it, standing alone in the employee locker room while the distant sounds of the estate slowly faded into silence. Midnight had come and gone. Most of the guests had left. The chandeliers were probably still glowing in the ballroom, but down here everything felt smaller. Realer. My fingers trembled as I unfolded the letter. I already knew what it would say. I had read versions of it 3 times before. Recommended procedure. Urgent treatment. Estimated cost. Limited timeline. The numbers blurred together. $28,000. I closed my eyes. My mother had spent her entire life taking care of other people. She had worked double shifts at diners, cleaned motel rooms, and skipped meals more times than I could count so I would never have to. Now I could not even afford to help her when she needed me most. The thought settled over my chest like concrete. I sat on the wooden bench and stared at the floor. The fluorescent light above buzzed softly. Somewhere nearby, an industrial washing machine hummed through another cycle. Ordinary sounds. Ordinary moments. Yet it felt like my entire world was slipping through my fingers. I pressed the letter against my chest and tried to breathe. Tears threatened, but I fought them back. Crying never paid bills. Crying never fixed anything. The locker room door opened unexpectedly. I quickly lowered the paper. One of the estate managers stepped inside. He glanced at me briefly before retrieving something from his locker. I forced a smile. He nodded politely and left. The second the door closed, I released the breath I had been holding. Even now, I hated letting people see me struggle. Especially here. The wealthy guests upstairs talked about investments worth millions of dollars while I calculated how many extra shifts it would take to save a few hundred. I folded the letter carefully and slipped it into my bag. Then I headed toward the staff exit. Outside, the night air was cool. The estate grounds stretched for acres beneath silver moonlight. Fountains shimmered in the distance. Luxury surrounded every corner. It felt like another planet. I started walking toward the employee parking lot when headlights swept across the driveway. A sleek black sedan rolled past slowly. I barely noticed it until it stopped near the front entrance. A driver stepped out first. Then Ethan Ashford emerged from the back seat. Even from a distance, he carried himself differently than everyone else. Calm. Controlled. Like the world adjusted itself around him instead of the other way around. I looked away immediately. People like him did not notice people like me. Not really. Yet as I continued walking, I felt that strange sensation again. That feeling of being watched. I glanced back. Ethan stood beneath the estate lights speaking with someone near the entrance. But his eyes were not on them. They were on me. Just for a second. Long enough to make my pulse stumble. Then another guest approached him and the moment disappeared. I told myself it meant nothing. I climbed into my aging sedan and started the engine. The dashboard light flickered. The gas tank was nearly empty. Another problem waiting for me tomorrow. As I pulled away from the estate, I never imagined that the letter sitting inside my bag had already changed everything. Because somewhere behind those glowing windows, Ethan Ashford had seen far more than I realized. The next morning smelled like fresh coffee, floor polish, and pressure. I arrived at Ashford Estate 15 minutes early, hoping to organize my thoughts before another long shift. The hospital letter remained folded inside my purse like a silent clock counting down. Every minute mattered now. Every dollar mattered more. I tied my apron, checked the service schedule, and headed toward the main kitchen. The staff buzzed with unusual energy. Housekeepers whispered near the pantry. Servers exchanged curious glances. Even the executive chef looked tense. Something was happening. I found Olivia, another maid, arranging silverware beside the breakfast room. "What is going on?" I asked quietly. She looked around before leaning closer. "Mr. Ashford is personally selecting someone for a special assignment." My stomach tightened. "Why?" She shrugged. "Nobody knows." Before I could ask another question, the estate manager entered the room. His polished shoes clicked sharply against the hardwood floor. Instantly, every conversation stopped. "Attention, everyone," he announced. "Mr. Ashford will be hosting several investors tomorrow evening. A private reception. One staff member will coordinate guest preparation inside the East Wing. a murmur spread through the room. The East Wing was rarely used. It housed some of the estate's most exclusive spaces. The assignment requires organization, discretion, and attention to detail. The manager glanced down at a clipboard. Then he spoke a name I never expected to hear. Emily Carter. For a moment, I genuinely thought there must be another Emily in the room. Several employees turned toward me. Olivia's eyes widened. My own pulse hammered in my ears. Me? I asked. Yes, the manager replied. Report to the East Wing at 9 o'clock. The room remained silent after he left. Then the whispers started. Some sounded surprised. Others sounded annoyed. One server laughed under her breath. Good luck with that. Another shook his head. She will never pull it off. I pretended not to hear. But every word landed. By 9 o'clock, I stood outside the East Wing carrying a notepad and enough nervous energy to power the entire estate. The doors opened onto a world I had never seen before. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked rolling green hills. Original paintings lined the walls. Crystal fixtures sparkled beneath natural sunlight. Everything looked perfect. Expensive. Untouchable. A senior assistant handed me a detailed checklist. Floral arrangements. Seating confirmations. Guest preferences. Timing schedules. At first glance, it looked impossible. There were hundreds of details. One mistake could ruin everything. I swallowed hard and got to work. Hours disappeared. I checked lists twice. Then 3 times. I called vendors. Rearranged deliveries. Solved problems before they became emergencies. By late afternoon, the room had transformed. Everything flowed smoothly. Everything felt ready. As I reviewed the final seating chart, a familiar voice broke the silence behind me. Interesting. I turned so quickly that my clipboard nearly slipped from my hands. Ethan Ashford stood near the doorway. His navy suit fit perfectly. Sunlight streamed through the windows behind him. For a second, I forgot how to breathe. His eyes moved slowly across the room. Then back to me. Most people would have asked for help by now, he said calmly. I tightened my grip on the clipboard. I did not want to fail. Something unreadable flickered across his expression. Not amusement. Not approval. Something deeper. Then he nodded once. Good answer. And as he walked away, I realized something that unsettled me far more than the assignment itself. Ethan Ashford had not come to inspect the room. He had come to inspect me. The scent of fresh lilies filled the grand foyer before I even saw her. Every employee in the estate seemed to move a little faster that morning. Voices dropped. Postures straightened. The atmosphere had changed overnight, as if everyone had received the same warning. Then the front doors opened. Victoria Langston stepped inside surrounded by designer luggage, personal assistants, and enough confidence to fill the entire estate. I recognized her immediately from magazine covers. She was beautiful in the polished, effortless way wealth often appeared. Blonde hair. Perfect posture. A smile that never quite reached her eyes. More importantly, she was Ethan Ashford's fiancée. The future Mrs. Ashford. I lowered my gaze and continued arranging flowers near the dining room entrance. People like Victoria rarely noticed employees unless something went wrong. Unfortunately, she noticed me almost immediately. You, she said, pointing in my direction. I looked up. Yes, ma'am? Her eyes swept over my uniform. The roses in my suite are the wrong shade. I glanced toward the arrangement. I apologize. I can replace them right away. Obviously. Her tone was light, almost cheerful. Somehow that made it worse. I carried the flowers upstairs and spent the next hour correcting details throughout her private wing. Nothing seemed to satisfy her. The tea was too cold. The towels were folded incorrectly. The sunlight through the windows was somehow unacceptable. By noon, exhaustion sat heavy on my shoulders. Still, I remained polite. My mother needed treatment. Pride did not pay hospital bills. Later that afternoon, several guests arrived unexpectedly for a private luncheon. The dining room sparkled beneath natural light pouring through 20-foot windows. Crystal glasses reflected tiny rainbows across the polished table. Everything looked perfect. Almost. Victoria stood near the head of the room examining the setup. Her expression tightened. A single glass sat slightly out of alignment. Less than an inch. Barely noticeable. She turned toward me. Fix it. I stepped forward immediately and adjusted the glass. Better? I asked. Instead of answering, she lifted a champagne flute from a nearby tray and handed it to me. Clean the spill. There was no spill. I looked down at the spotless floor. Several guests noticed the exchange. A few exchanged uncomfortable glances. Victoria smiled sweetly. Well? I am waiting. Heat crept into my cheeks. I understood exactly what she wanted. Not cleanliness. Submission. A demonstration. A reminder of where everyone belonged. The room had gone quiet. I could feel dozens of eyes watching. For 1 second, I almost complied. Then I thought about my mother. About every double shift she had worked. Every sacrifice she had made. About the dignity she had taught me to keep even when life offered very little else. I placed the champagne flute back onto the tray. Carefully. Respectfully. Then I met Victoria's gaze. I am happy to correct mistakes, I said softly. But I will not pretend there is one when there is not. Silence crashed across the room. Victoria's smile disappeared instantly. The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Then another voice entered the silence. Calm. Deep. Familiar. Neither would I. Every head turned toward the doorway. Ethan Ashford had just walked into the room. The silence after Ethan spoke felt louder than any argument could have. Nobody moved. Nobody even seemed to breathe. Victoria's expression remained perfectly composed, but something cold flashed behind her eyes before disappearing just as quickly. Ethan stepped farther into the dining room, his attention settling briefly on the untouched floor beside me. I see no spill, he said calmly. Several guests shifted uncomfortably. A few looked away. Victoria laughed softly, the sound polished and effortless. It was only a joke. Ethan nodded once. Then I am sure everyone understands it now. The conversation ended there. At least on the surface. Within seconds, guests resumed speaking and servers returned to work, but the atmosphere had changed. I could feel it. Victoria turned away first. I lowered my eyes and focused on my duties. Yet my hands trembled slightly as I adjusted place settings. Not because of Victoria. Because Ethan had stepped in when he did not have to. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of polished silver, fresh flowers, and carefully measured smiles. By evening, dark clouds had gathered over the estate. Rain tapped softly against the enormous windows. The weather forecast predicted a major storm moving through the county overnight. Most employees hurried home as soon as their shifts ended. I was gathering my things when my phone vibrated inside my apron pocket. The screen displayed the hospital's number. My stomach dropped instantly. Hello? I answered. A nurse explained that my mother had experienced complications during a routine examination. She was stable. But additional tests were required. Additional tests meant additional costs. I thanked the nurse, ended the call, and stood frozen beneath the service entrance awning while rain poured from the sky. The parking lot shimmered beneath the storm. For several seconds, I simply stared into the darkness. I had spent months trying to stay positive. Working extra shifts. Skipping meals. saving every dollar possible. Somehow it never felt like enough. My old sedan struggled through sheets of rain during the drive to the hospital. Wind rattled the windows. Traffic crawled along the highway. By the time I arrived, my nerves felt stretched to the breaking point. My mother smiled when she saw me. She always smiled. Even now. Even wearing a hospital bracelet. Even pretending not to be afraid. We talked for nearly an hour. Mostly about ordinary things. Television shows. Grocery prices. Neighbors. Neither of us mentioned the bills sitting quietly beneath a stack of paperwork near the window. Eventually she fell asleep. I kissed her forehead and stepped into the hallway. The billing office remained open despite the late hour. A tired receptionist greeted me kindly. I took a deep breath and asked for the updated balance. She typed for several seconds. Then her expression changed. Confusion crossed her face. She checked the screen again. "That cannot be right," she murmured. My pulse quickened. "What is wrong?" The receptionist looked up. "According to the system, the outstanding balance has been paid." I stared at her. Certain I had misunderstood. "Paid?" She nodded. "Every dollar." Rain hammered against the hospital windows. Somewhere down the hall, a machine beeped softly. The world seemed to tilt beneath my feet. "Who paid it?" I whispered. The receptionist clicked through several screens. Then she frowned. "I am sorry. The donation was submitted anonymously." And for the second time that week, I found myself wondering why my life seemed to be changing the moment Ethan Ashford started paying attention. For 3 days, I became obsessed with a stranger. Not because I knew who they were. Because I knew absolutely nothing. Every spare moment was spent searching for answers. I asked the hospital receptionist twice if there had been a mistake. There had not. I called the billing department. They confirmed the payment. Anonymous donor. Complete balance cleared. No additional information available. The mystery followed me everywhere. Through long shifts at the estate. Through late-night drives home. Through every conversation with my mother, who cried when I finally told her the bills were gone. She called it a miracle. I called it impossible. People did not spend that kind of money on strangers. Not in the real world. Yet someone had. The question refused to leave me alone. Rain tapped softly against the estate windows on Thursday afternoon as I arranged fresh flowers in the library. The room smelled of leather-bound books and cedar wood. Outside, gray clouds drifted across the hills. Inside, my thoughts remained fixed on the hospital. "You look distracted." The voice startled me. I nearly dropped the vase. Olivia stood nearby carrying folded linens. "Sorry," she said with a grin. "You have looked like that all week." I laughed nervously. "Just tired." She narrowed her eyes. "That is not what tired looks like." Before I could respond, the library door opened. Ethan entered carrying a folder beneath one arm. Instantly, Olivia straightened and excused herself. Within seconds, I found myself alone with the one person everyone seemed to orbit around. He moved quietly for a man whose presence filled every room. His attention remained on the documents in his hands. I returned to arranging flowers, determined to appear normal. The silence stretched longer than expected. Then he spoke. "Your mother is doing better?" My hands froze. Slowly, I looked up. Ethan stood beside a bookshelf several feet away. His expression revealed nothing. Yet my pulse immediately accelerated. "Yes," I answered carefully. "She is recovering well." He nodded. "That is good news." My mind raced. Very few people at the estate even knew my mother was ill. Fewer still knew details. Yet Ethan sounded completely certain. Before I could ask how he knew, he had already returned his attention to the folder. The conversation should have ended there. Instead, curiosity pushed past caution. "Can I ask you something?" He looked up. "Of course." I hesitated. "Do you believe people help strangers for no reason?" Something shifted in his eyes. Not surprise. Recognition. As though he understood exactly what I meant. He closed the folder slowly. "Sometimes the right thing to do is reason enough." The answer lingered between us. Simple. Direct. Impossible to forget. Then a staff member entered the library to deliver a message, and the moment disappeared. Ethan left shortly afterward. Yet his words stayed with me long after he was gone. That evening, I walked through the estate parking lot beneath a sky painted gold and orange by the setting sun. For the first time all week, I allowed myself to consider a possibility I had avoided. What if the anonymous donor was not a stranger at all? What if the answer had been standing in front of me the entire time? And as I started my car, I realized something even more unsettling. I no longer wanted to know the truth only because of the money. I wanted to know because Ethan Ashford was becoming impossible to stop thinking about. The first person to stand up for someone else is rarely the strongest person in the room. Sometimes they are simply the only one willing to speak. Saturday afternoon brought another private event to Ashford Estate. The weather was perfect. Sunlight poured through the tall windows. Classical music drifted through the halls. Wealthy guests arrived in polished luxury cars while employees moved quietly through the background like shadows. I spent most of the morning helping prepare the terrace for a charity luncheon organized by Victoria. Everything had to be flawless. Every napkin folded precisely. Every flower arranged perfectly. Every detail inspected twice. The pressure seemed to follow everyone wherever she went. Around noon, I carried a tray of sparkling water onto the terrace. The event was already underway. Guests laughed beneath cream-colored umbrellas while servers moved between tables. Victoria stood near the center of it all, smiling for photographs. From a distance, she looked graceful. Elegant. Untouchable. Then I heard a crash. A young server named Lily froze beside one of the tables. She could not have been older than 19. A glass had slipped from her tray and shattered against the stone floor. The sound silenced several nearby conversations. Immediately, panic flooded her face. I recognized that look. I had worn it myself not long ago. "I am so sorry," Lily said quickly. "I will clean it right away." Before she could move, Victoria turned toward her. The smile vanished. "Do you have any idea how expensive this event is?" Lily's face turned pale. "Yes, ma'am." "I am sorry." Sorry does not replace crystal. Several guests exchanged uncomfortable glances. Nobody said anything. Lily bent down to gather the broken pieces. Her hands shook visibly. "Maybe some people are simply not qualified for this level of service," Victoria continued. The words were not shouted. Somehow that made them feel worse. I looked around the terrace. Dozens of people watched. Nobody intervened. My stomach tightened. Every instinct told me to stay quiet. Keep working. Protect my job. But Lily looked moments away from tears. And suddenly I remembered my mother teaching me something years ago at our tiny kitchen table. If kindness only exists when it is easy, it is not really kindness. Before I could stop myself, I stepped forward. It was an accident. The words escaped before I had time to reconsider them. Victoria slowly turned toward me. The entire terrace seemed to freeze. "Excuse me?" she asked. My pulse pounded in my ears. "The glass slipped," I said carefully. "Anyone could have made the same mistake." Lily stared at me in disbelief. Several guests stopped pretending not to listen. Victoria folded her arms. "And when exactly did household staff begin offering opinions?" The question carried enough frost to lower the temperature 10 degrees. Fear twisted inside me. But something stronger kept me standing. I am not offering an opinion, I replied softly. Only the truth. Silence followed. Long, heavy. Dangerous. Then another voice entered the conversation. Which is becoming increasingly rare these days. Ethan stood near the terrace entrance. I had not even noticed him arrive. His gaze moved from Victoria to Lily and finally settled on me. There was no anger in his expression. No amusement either. Just quiet focus. Victoria looked away first. For reasons I could not explain, that fact mattered. Later, as the luncheon ended and guests began leaving, I caught Ethan watching me again. Not like an employer observing an employee. Not like a billionaire noticing a maid. It felt as though he was trying to understand something. And for the first time, I realized I was doing exactly the same thing. The fall began with a necklace. Looking back, it is almost funny how something so small nearly destroyed everything. The week after the charity luncheon felt different. People still treated me the same on the surface, but whispers followed me through hallways now. Conversations stopped when I entered rooms. Employees exchanged glances they quickly looked away from. At first I ignored it. Gossip was as common in a place like Ashford Estate as polished silver and expensive wine. Then I started hearing pieces of it. Did you see how often he talks to her? Victoria knows. That girl is getting too comfortable. Every rumor made me more uncomfortable. I had spent my entire life trying not to attract attention. Suddenly I seemed to have all of it. The situation only worsened when Ethan began assigning me more responsibilities. Nothing inappropriate. Nothing personal. Just projects. Events. Tasks that required trust. Yet each assignment seemed to fuel another round of speculation. I hated it. One afternoon, while preparing guest suites for an upcoming weekend gathering, I found Victoria standing inside the hallway outside her private wing. She smiled when she saw me. That alone should have worried me. Emily, she said warmly. I need a favor. The sweetness in her voice felt unnatural. Still, refusing was not an option. She handed me a velvet jewelry box. Please take this to the east sitting room. I will retrieve it later. Of course. I carried the box exactly where she requested. Nothing seemed unusual. I placed it carefully on a side table and returned to work. By evening, the estate buzzed with activity. Wealthy guests filled the halls. Laughter drifted from every room. Crystal glasses reflected golden light. Everything appeared perfect. Until a scream shattered the atmosphere. Heads turned instantly. Victoria stood near the grand staircase, one hand pressed dramatically against her chest. My necklace is gone. Silence spread across the foyer. Several employees exchanged alarmed looks. The necklace apparently belonged to her grandmother. Family heirloom. Extremely valuable. Staff members immediately began searching. Rooms were checked. Hallways inspected. Guests questioned politely. I felt sorry for her. Until the estate manager approached me. His expression was grim. Emily, may I speak with you? My stomach tightened. 20 minutes later, I sat inside a private office staring at the velvet jewelry box resting on a desk. The necklace had been discovered inside my supply cart. For several seconds, I genuinely could not understand what I was seeing. That is impossible, I whispered. The manager looked uncomfortable. Several witnesses confirmed the location. My pulse roared in my ears. I did not take it. The words sounded weak even to me. Because the evidence sat directly in front of us. Victoria entered shortly afterward. Her disappointment looked almost convincing. I trusted you, she said softly. The accusation hurt more than anger would have. I looked around the room desperately. Hoping someone would speak. Hoping someone would question what happened. Nobody did. The decision came quickly. Effective immediately, my employment at Ashford Estate was terminated. I packed my belongings in silence. The walk through the estate felt endless. Employees avoided eye contact. A few looked sympathetic. Most simply looked relieved it was not them. Outside, the evening air felt cold against my skin. I carried a cardboard box to my car and placed it carefully in the passenger seat. Then I looked back at the estate one final time. Window lights glowed against the darkening sky. Somewhere inside those walls was the only person who might have believed me. But Ethan Ashford never came. The hardest part was not losing the job. It was losing faith in my own judgment. For days, I replayed every moment in my head. Every conversation. Every task. Every second leading up to the discovery of the necklace. None of it made sense. I knew I had not taken it. Yet the evidence had appeared so perfectly arranged that even I struggled to understand how it happened. My life became smaller after that. The estate was gone. The steady paycheck was gone. The routine that had carried me through difficult months had vanished overnight. I spent my mornings helping my mother during her recovery and my afternoons searching for work. Rejection arrived faster than opportunity. Ashford Estate carried influence. News traveled. Potential employers smiled politely during interviews and never called back. Meanwhile, across town, events inside the estate were unfolding without me. I did not know that Ethan had returned from a 3-day business trip the morning after my dismissal. I did not know that the first thing he noticed was my absence. According to staff members who would later tell the story, he asked a simple question during breakfast. "Where is Emily?" The silence that followed apparently answered more than words could. By noon, he knew I had been fired. By evening, he had reviewed the incident report himself. Something about it bothered him immediately. The timeline felt wrong. The details felt too convenient. Ethan built a billion-dollar company by noticing patterns other people missed. And this pattern made no sense. He requested security footage from every hallway connected to the investigation. Hours of recordings appeared on monitors inside his private office. Most executives would have delegated the task. Ethan watched every minute personally. Frame by frame. Hour by hour. The answer finally appeared after midnight. A service corridor. A camera angle nobody else had bothered to check. The footage showed a housekeeping cart parked briefly outside a storage room. Moments later, another figure entered the hallway. Victoria's personal assistant. She looked around carefully before placing something inside the cart. Then she walked away. The video lasted less than 20 seconds. Less than 20 seconds to destroy someone's reputation. Less than 20 seconds to reveal the truth. Ethan replayed the footage 3 times. The result never changed. The necklace had been planted. The next morning, several senior staff members were summoned to a private meeting. Security reports were reviewed. Additional footage was examined. Statements were compared. Piece by piece, the entire story unraveled. The assistant eventually admitted she had followed instructions. She refused to reveal every detail. She did not need to. The evidence spoke for itself. Meanwhile, I remained completely unaware. I spent that same afternoon sitting beside my mother's hospital bed, helping her solve a crossword puzzle from the local newspaper. We laughed over one particularly difficult clue. For the first time in days, things almost felt normal. Then my phone rang. An unfamiliar number flashed across the screen. I nearly ignored it. Something told me not to. "Hello?" I answered. A familiar voice responded immediately. Calm. Deep. Impossible to mistake. "Emily," Ethan said. "There is something I need to tell you." And for the first time since I walked away from Ashford Estate, hope returned. The ballroom glittered like a field of stars trapped beneath crystal and gold. Wealthy donors, business leaders, and socialites filled the room with polished smiles and carefully rehearsed conversations. I should not have been there. 2 days earlier, Ethan's phone call had revealed everything. The footage. The planted necklace. The truth. He had apologized personally. Not through lawyers. Not through managers. Personally. Then he invited me to attend the annual Ashford Foundation Gala as his guest. I almost refused. Every instinct told me to stay home. But something in his voice convinced me otherwise. Now I stood near the entrance wearing the only formal dress I owned, feeling completely out of place. The fabric was simple. Elegant but modest. Around me, diamonds sparkled beneath chandelier light. Yet for the first time in my life, I did not feel ashamed of where I came from. I had done nothing wrong. Across the ballroom, cameras flashed as Victoria moved through the crowd. She looked flawless. Confident. Untouchable. Most guests still believed she would soon become Mrs. Ashford. The irony almost made me laugh. The orchestra softened as Ethan stepped onto the stage. Instantly, conversations faded. He stood beneath a cascade of golden light, calm and composed as always. The room naturally gravitated toward him. "Thank you all for being here tonight," he began. His voice carried effortlessly across the ballroom. He spoke briefly about the foundation, charitable initiatives, and future projects. Everything seemed normal. Then his tone changed. Subtly. Deliberately. "Before we continue," he said, "there is a matter of integrity that needs to be addressed." A ripple of confusion moved through the audience. I felt my pulse quicken. Ethan turned toward a large projection screen behind him. Several weeks ago, an employee of Ashford Estate was falsely accused of misconduct. Silence settled over the room. Complete and immediate. Victoria's smile disappeared. Ethan continued. That employee lost her position and her reputation because important facts were deliberately hidden. The screen illuminated. Security footage appeared. The hallway. The cart. The assistant placing the necklace inside. Every second unfolded before hundreds of witnesses. Gasps spread through the ballroom. Some guests stared openly. Others exchanged shocked looks. Nobody spoke. Nobody needed to. The truth spoke for itself. Victoria's face drained of color. For the first time since I met her, she looked uncertain. Human. Vulnerable. Ethan never raised his voice. Never showed anger. He simply presented the facts. When the footage ended, the silence felt enormous. Then Ethan spoke one final sentence. Emily Carter deserved the truth from the beginning. Every eye in the room turned toward me. Months ago, that attention would have terrified me. Tonight it felt different. Because for once, they were not looking at a maid. They were looking at a person. Ethan stepped down from the stage and crossed the ballroom. Cameras followed him. Guests parted automatically. He stopped directly in front of me. I should have protected your reputation sooner, he said quietly. I am sorry. In a room filled with power, wealth, and influence, the most important thing anyone had ever given me was not money. It was respect. And judging by the look in Victoria's eyes as Ethan stood beside me, she had finally realized she had lost something far more valuable than a gala. The applause followed me all the way to the exit, and I hated every second of it. Hours earlier, those same people had believed I was a thief. Now they looked at me like some kind of symbol. Neither version felt real. The cool night air hit my face as I stepped outside the ballroom. Behind me, music resumed. Laughter returned. The gala continued as though nothing extraordinary had happened. But my entire life had changed again, and I needed space to breathe. I walked toward the gardens behind the estate, following a stone path lined with lanterns. The scent of roses drifted through the evening air. Somewhere in the distance, water flowed softly from a fountain. For the first time all night, silence surrounded me. Or at least it did for a moment. Emily. I closed my eyes. Of course he followed me. Ethan's footsteps slowed as he approached. When I turned, he stood several feet away with his hands in his pockets. No audience. No cameras. No billion-dollar confidence filling the space around him. Just a man looking unusually uncertain. "You should be inside," I said. "So should you." I laughed softly. "I do not belong in there." "You belong anywhere you choose to be." The words would have meant more if they had come from anyone else. Coming from Ethan, they felt dangerous. Not because they were false. Because part of me wanted to believe them. He stepped closer. "The board approved your reinstatement this morning." I looked away. "I know. Your position is waiting." "I know that too." Silence settled between us. He seemed surprised by my lack of enthusiasm. Honestly, I understood why. A few months ago, I would have done almost anything to keep that job. But standing there beneath the lantern light, something had changed. "You are not coming back," he said quietly. It was not a question. I shook my head. "No." His expression tightened slightly. "Because of what happened?" I took a deep breath. "Because of what I learned." He waited. I continued. "When I lost that job, I lost everything. My income. My reputation. My future plans. And I survived anyway." The truth felt strangely liberating. For the first time in my life, I stopped building my world around what other people thought of me. Ethan studied me carefully. "You think returning would erase that?" "I think returning would make it look like all I ever wanted was permission to stay." The fountain continued its steady rhythm nearby. Somewhere beyond the trees, music drifted across the night. Ethan looked down for a moment before meeting my eyes again. "Then what do you want?" Nobody had ever asked me that question before. Not really. I thought about my mother. About the years spent surviving instead of dreaming. About every compromise I had accepted because I believed I had no choice. "I want a future that belongs to me," I said. His gaze never left mine. And for the first time since we met, I saw something vulnerable behind the control he carried so effortlessly. "Then I hope you find it," he said. It was the right answer. The respectful answer. Yet disappointment flickered across his face before he could hide it. And as he turned to leave, I realized something neither of us was ready to say out loud. Walking away from Ashford Estate had been easy. Walking away from Ethan Ashford was becoming impossible. 3 months passed before Ethan stopped trying to solve problems with influence and started showing up with patience instead. At first, I barely noticed. My life had become busy in the best possible way. With my mother's health improving, I finally had time to focus on myself. I enrolled in a hospitality management program at the local community college. I worked part-time at a small event planning company. For the first time in years, my future felt like something I was building instead of something I was surviving. Yet somehow Ethan remained present. Not through grand gestures. Not through expensive gifts. He never sent flowers. Never offered money. Never used his position to open doors I had not asked him to open. Instead, he appeared in ordinary moments. One afternoon I found him volunteering at a community fundraiser my company helped organize. Another time he spent an hour helping my mother assemble a complicated bookshelf because the instructions made no sense. Neither event felt accidental. But neither felt manipulative either. That was what made it difficult. He was trying. Really trying. One Saturday morning I arrived at the local farmer's market to meet my mother for breakfast. The smell of fresh coffee and baked bread drifted through the cool air. Families wandered between vendor booths. Children laughed somewhere nearby. It felt like a completely different world from the glittering halls of Ashford Estate. I spotted Ethan almost immediately. He stood beside a produce stand holding a paper cup of coffee and looking entirely out of place among the crowd. My mother smiled before I even reached them. "You are late," she informed me. "You two know each other now?" I asked suspiciously. Ethan looked almost guilty. My mother laughed. He visits more often than you do. I stared at him. You have been visiting my mother? She makes excellent tea. Traitor, I told her. She seemed delighted by the accusation. We spent the next hour wandering through the market together. Talking about nothing important. Weather. Books. Ridiculous prices for organic tomatoes. Simple conversations. Normal conversations. The kind most people take for granted. Somewhere between the coffee stand and the flower vendors, I realized Ethan was no longer trying to impress me. He was trying to know me. There was a difference. Later that afternoon, after my mother headed home, Ethan and I sat on a park bench overlooking a small lake. Sunlight danced across the water. A gentle breeze stirred the trees overhead. Neither of us spoke for several minutes. The silence felt comfortable. I spent most of my life believing success could solve anything, Ethan said finally. I looked at him. And? He smiled faintly. It turns out success is terrible at convincing someone to trust you. I laughed. That lesson cost you a few months. Worth every second. The answer arrived so quickly that I knew he meant it. My heart responded before my common sense could intervene. For months, I had convinced myself that walking away was the brave choice. Maybe it had been. But staying away forever was becoming harder to justify. Because the man sitting beside me was no longer asking for a chance because he was powerful. He was asking because he cared. And for the first time, I found myself wondering what would happen if I said yes. 1 year later, the sound that echoed through the chapel was not laughter. It was joy. Sunlight streamed through tall stained glass windows, painting ribbons of color across polished wooden floors. Fresh white roses lined the aisle. Family and friends filled every seat. As I stood behind the chapel doors, holding a bouquet with trembling hands, I thought about the girl I used to be. The girl who counted every dollar. The girl who believed dignity meant staying quiet. The girl who stood in a ballroom while strangers laughed and told her she should remain invisible. She felt very far away now. Ready? My mother asked softly beside me. Her smile was brighter than I had seen in years. Healthy. Strong. Present. More than anything else, that felt like a miracle. I nodded. The music began. The doors opened. Every face turned toward me. The aisle stretched ahead beneath warm afternoon light. At the far end stood Ethan. For a man who had negotiated billion-dollar deals without hesitation, he looked surprisingly nervous. The sight made me smile. As I walked forward, memories surfaced one after another. The shattered glass. The hospital letter. The anonymous donation. The accusations. The heartbreak. Every painful moment that once felt like an ending had quietly become part of a much larger story. When I finally reached him, Ethan took my hand gently. For a second, neither of us spoke. We simply looked at each other. No cameras. No headlines. No expectations. Just two people who had spent a year learning that love was not built through power. It was built through choice. The ceremony passed in a blur of emotion. Vows were exchanged. Promises made. Tears wiped away. My mother cried openly. Several guests did too. Even some of Ethan's famously reserved business associates looked suspiciously emotional. Then came the moment everyone would remember. As we turned to walk back down the aisle together, I noticed familiar faces among the crowd. Former guests from the estate. Former employees. People who had witnessed different chapters of my life. Some had doubted me. Some had underestimated me. Some had simply never bothered to see me at all. Yet none of that mattered anymore. Their opinions no longer defined my worth. Outside, beneath a brilliant blue sky, guests gathered for the reception. Laughter drifted across the gardens. Music floated through the air. Ethan and I slipped away briefly to the same stone path near the fountain where we once had our most difficult conversation. The water still flowed gently. The roses still bloomed. Everything looked the same. Yet everything had changed. Ethan reached for my hand. "There is something I never told you," he said. I smiled. "What is that?" His eyes softened. "You did not become my wife because I saved you." Emotion tightened in my chest. He squeezed my hand lightly. "You became my wife because you saved me." For a moment, neither of us spoke. We did not need to. Because the greatest reversal in this story was never about wealth or status. The world began respecting me when I stood beside a billionaire. Ethan began respecting me when I was still a maid. And in the end, that made all the difference.